I have played Soulframe Preludes a lot, but I've not really seen any content that explains the game in a way that I would want to learn about it myself. So I thought I'd make this video for people like me that like lots of details, particularly around the combat, as I've seen some great videos that I nevertheless felt kind of misrepresented how the combat can feel. There's a bunch of first impressions, but I wanted to see something a bit deeper, so I made this and I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to give you a very quick and shallow grounding in the world so that you can discover it for yourself when you play, and then I want to deep dive into the combat and how you can customize your combat experience. For the story, it seems you play a traitorous exile that washes up on a beach, which is a bit familiar. But then humanoid aliens are invading from outer space. They've come to loot and pollute the planet to turn it from this into this. Perhaps as some kind of terraforming effort. They're brainwashing people with something called the spell song, but you seem to be immune. And now you've got to stop them and save as many deer, beavers, squirrels, and bunnies as you can along the way. So that's the gist of Soulframe. It's an upcoming science fantasy action RPG made by Digital Extremes, who you may know as the people that make Warframe. The version of Soulframe we currently have access to is Soulframe Prelude 7. This is currently still by invite only, with keys being sent out every week, and I think they're increasing how many get sent out over time. The game's absolutely beautiful, and it's surprisingly well optimized actually. That's all good, but I want to talk about the combat. This is just a random overworld trash pack, but they're really fun to fight, and the moment-to-moment action can feel super satisfying. As you can see, the combat in Soulframe primarily takes place in melee, supported by your packed abilities, which are magical powers that I'll get into in a little bit. It definitely needs more work doing on it, more challenges in particular, but again, this is in a pre-alpha state. So how does combat work? You can light attack, heavy attack, throw your weapon, kick, block, dash, and roll. If you take damage, you have a limited number of health potions that you mainly recover by looting enemies, or things like freeing bunnies. These are the kind of things that you'd expect from a game like this, but there are a couple of differences that completely change how combat in Soulframe feels when compared to, for example, Elden Ring. Firstly, you don't have stamina. You can just keep attacking, blocking, dashing without having to worry about that resource, and that makes a big difference to how powerful you feel. But for me, it pales in comparison to what I think is the main difference that sets Soulframe's combat apart, which is commitment. When you take an action in Elden Ring, or most games like it, you're making a commitment. You're locked into that action until it's finished, and this gives the combat a lot of weight, tension, and consequence. If you make a wrong decision, if you mistime an action, you're gonna get turned into red mist. However, in Soulframe, most actions you take are non-committal. And what I mean by this is that mid-action, you can animation cancel that action with dashing or blocking. This drastically alters the flow of combat, and while that commitment feels amazing in a game like Elden Ring, its absence in Soulframe makes you feel like you're in an anime, you're a superhero, or a Tenno. So to circle back to the actions you can take in combat, light attack is incredibly powerful because it does good damage, and you can weave it between these defensive actions the fastest without losing damage by interrupting it as often. Heavy attacks, on the other hand, are of course slower, but they don't do that much more damage per hit. We don't have a target dummy or anything like that in Prelude 7, but I suspect that spamming heavy attack is probably a DPS loss over using lights. What heavy attacks are good for is countering blocking enemies, because some of the damage will still go through, and staggering them, or even knocking them down. It's not a complete guard break like a kick, which I'll get to in a second, but some of the damage goes through. It gives a bit of stagger, and it's still safe as you can animation cancel heavies too. If you want to completely break an opponent's guard, you can kick them while they're blocking. It doesn't do any damage, but it leaves them vulnerable to follow-up strikes, and as kicks are also animation cancelable, it is safe, like this friend. Throwing your weapon I find to mainly be a utility action for things like pulling or bonking archers. You can use it to soften an enemy up before they reach you, but it's pretty slow, especially if there's multiple opponents, and it requires a headshot to do any meaningful damage. Dashing and rolling are your basic defensive movement abilities. You'll dash first and then roll if you chain them. Typically, you don't want to roll so much though, as it's got more recovery to it. Both dashes and rolls do have invincibility frames built in, and you can spec into the ability to perform a perfect dodge, which has bonus damage follow-up attacks using your combat arts, which I'll get to in just a moment. Holding down block lets you block attacks, but it leaves you vulnerable to being kicked. There are also unblockable attacks, which are very telegraphed as they make the enemy's weapon glow golden, and they usually have a big wind-up. However, if you block at the last moment as you're about to get hit, you'll instead perform a parry. And parrying in Soulframe is absolutely broken in the best way. It feels awesome, has a cool sound effect, and it's my favourite part of the game. While you can only block in front of you, you can parry attacks from all directions, including multiple attacks at the same time if their timing is close together. Not only that, but you get to counterattack with a riposte for big damage, and some weapons can unlock the ability to parry unblockable attacks too through their combat arts, which we can talk about now. At the moment, there are 5 categories of weapons in Prelude 7, though there will be more coming in the future, including things like magical weapons. Each category of weapon has its own combat arts that allow you to customize the benefits you get when using that weapon type, and these weapon categories are long blades, shields, daggers, polearms, and bows. There's quite a lot of crossover in the combat arts at the moment, and I think a lot of the upgrades are likely placeholders while DE are cooking, as again, we're still in early development. But for now, the upgrades you can get grant buffs like heavy attacks charging faster, extra damage on perfect dodge or parry, more damage on consecutive attacks, things like that. A lot of them are just minor buffs you won't really notice during your fights, but a few are very impactful. For instance, long swords, shields, and polearms can unlock the unyielding ability, which lets you parry unblockable attacks. And long swords and daggers can unlock swift parry, which increases the parry window so drastically that parrying becomes easier than clicking the like button. Another thing that combat arts buff is smite, which is Soulframe's version of a critical hit. In Soulframe, your weapons themselves don't crit, they instead inflict a debuff that will stay on an enemy for a few seconds, and then you can use an action to detonate it and hit them with the Shang Tsung Your Soul is Mine. Notably, this is one of the few actions you cannot animation cancel. It is unsafe, so make sure you're not about to get splattered by a banneret when you do it. After your choice of weapon, the main contributor to how your character plays is your choice of pact, which is this magical arm here. As you can see, this one is full metal and is perhaps attached to you through some manner of alchemy. They're part of your gear, something you can swap out at will. It's not a permanent character creation choice or anything like that. Pacts each grant passive bonuses, as well as 3 regular abilities that each have their own independent cooldowns, and an ultimate ability, which is charged by attacking enemies to fill this idle gauge here. At the moment, there are 3 pacts in the game. There's Ode Tempest. This is a strange mix of lightning damage, crowd control, and a strike immunity shield, topped off with an ultimate, giving you a shoulder-mounted lightning minigun. The passives include bonus lightning damage to grounded foes and allowing you to pull yourself to an enemy and strike them for additional damage. Next up is Fae, which is the one for the people that can't help but play a stealth archer in every game. You know who you are. You can turn groups of enemies to stone and then shatter them, or summon a flock of ravens to harass a priority target. Well, I say harass because I think it's intended to be a crowd control ability, but the way the balance currently is, they basically just get turned into meat confetti. You can shapeshift into an unassuming butterfly to get into position for a backstab, or use your ultimate to conjure a magical bow that's basically a missile launcher. The passives include a wall hack that I'm not sure is working right now, and target short attacking, sometimes being bound by roots and vines. Garrood is my usual choice because I tend to fight with my weapons most of the time. And Garrood is a defensive pact with a life drain ability, a blind and defense shred AoE, and a stampede of ghostly stags that damage and stagger enemies. The passives include idle power generation and turning your kick into a headbutt, which comes out much faster than a kick. The ultimate ability summons a big stag avatar that heals you and your allies, provides you with a large damage buff, continually staggers your enemies, and I think it gives you life leech too. It's kinda stacked. So what is there to do in the game? At the moment, there are a few story missions for you to play through, which I'm not going to cover in this video as I'd like to avoid big story spoilers. Then after you've done that, you can complete Sparrow's Tales, which are a set of repeatable quests that give varying rewards based on which one you're doing. These can be in the overworld, such as clearing an encampment or hunting a war party, or they can lead you to instance semi-randomized dungeons where you can explore, solve puzzles, slay enemies, and ultimately complete the tales to earn items and gear fragments, which are used to craft new gear in the Nightfold. The Nightfold is your hideout, your orbiter, your player housing. You can safely return here whenever you're not in combat, and it's here that you gather your ancestors to aid you in your journey with lore, gear customization, cosmetics, and crafting. There's also a dog. Crafting is your primary method of obtaining new gear, and leveling that gear is your way of progressing your personal power. Like in Warframe, you don't tend to find a completed weapon or piece of armor, and instead you gather fragments. Once you have enough fragments, you take them to the blacksmith, she'll take a few hours to make it, and then you can pick it up. Armor at this point is only cosmetic. We don't have gear sets or anything like that at this time. So as you use a weapon or pact, it will gain levels up to a max of 30. Then once you've gained enough levels on your gear, you'll earn a level on your character. This can be used to improve your virtues, which are your stats. At the moment, these are very cryptic, but we do know that different weapons scale with different virtues up to a cap. So you want to shift these points around as you change your loadout, which you can do for free at any time. Speaking of free, Soulframe will be a free-to-play game, which for me and many others typically evokes a sense of dread, as what free to play actually means is loot boxes and pay to win garbage. But I think it's fair to say that Digital Extremes are a well respected studio that have reasonable monetization practices that don't include buying power, and are regarded in a similar light to their fellow Planet Earth residents Grinding Gear Games, who make Path of Exile. As for what's next, the next patch for Soulframe, Preludes 8, is coming very soon, as DE have announced that it will be in January. But they're doing a live stream on the 31st, so I suspect they're going to be leaving it until the last minute. It looks like it's going to be a fairly big patch, so when we know more, I can make another video to cover that. In closing, Soulframe Prelude 7 is a really exciting peek at what Digital Extremes are cooking up for us, but at the moment it's not a lot more than a peek. After the few story missions, there isn't a huge amount to do in the game beyond farm some rare weapons and armor sets. And while there is some randomly generated content like the dungeons, of course it's only random to a point. There's not really much room for progression, and there's nothing in the game that provides a challenge at the moment. Most of the weapons in their category feel practically identical. They really need to make weapons in the same category stand out from one another in their performance to keep things fresh. And I'm sure they can do this. We've seen them do it in Warframe, you know. Tigris feels nothing like a Sobek or a Dragoon, but they're all shotguns. One thing I do have to mention is that the targeting has its moments of feeling really, really janky, which can make focusing priority targets down impossible. But they know this, we know this, and they've called it a pre-alpha for a reason. And based on their live streams, it seems to me that the innovators in the game dev space, as they're taking the highly unusual step of actually playing their own game, so I'm not too worried about it. I think in a year or so, this is going to be a really special game, and I can't wait to see where they go with it. But right now, don't feel too bad if you don't have a key yet, because what we have here is just a small part of the foundation for what the game will become. But I'd love to hear what you think. Have you played Preludes, or are you still waiting for a key? If you have played, what weapons and packs do you like? Have you beaten Avocot at Regatta yet? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.